I thought I bought shelter, but that sealed mold already knew my name.
She was 21 and homeless. No room, no family molds, no place to fire porcelain, just her grandmother's casting spoon and $6 she had saved beneath her boot lining. And with those $6, she bought a forgotten porcelain doll, arm casting room outside East Liverpool, Columbiana County, Ohio. Absent from county maps since 1978, the north roof sagged 9 inches at its center. A chimney crack ran down through 20 courses. The county condemned the workshop on October 3, 2022, and scheduled demolition for the following spring. But behind its lowest casting shelf waited a sealed slip mold, unopened for more than 30 years, holding bank drafts, a repair ledger, and a name Lena knew. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Lena Crowe had been measuring her whole life without knowing it. As a girl, she measured quiet by the space beneath doors, cold by the color of the kitchen windows, and safety by whether the adults lowered their voices before speaking. The Crowe house stood above the Ohio River in Wellsville, where freight trains passed after midnight and made the spoons tremble inside their drawer. Lena learned early that fragile things rarely broke at once. They weakened along lines no one bothered to notice. Her mother, Elaine, worked the breakfast shift at a riverside motel and returned smelling of coffee grounds and industrial soap. She paid bills in careful stacks, but never opened the envelopes twice. Whenever trouble entered the room, Elaine became very still, as though silence could make her too small for trouble to choose. The steadier presence was Lena's grandmother, Lena Crowe, who kept a tabletop kiln in a converted pantry behind her house. Every Saturday, Lena arrived before 8 with her hair tied back and her sleeves buttoned. Miriam mixed porcelain slip to the thickness of light cream, strained it through 80 mesh cloth, then poured it into plaster molds scarred with dates and initials. Doll arms were their specialty: curved elbows, separate thumbs, narrow wrists that warped if the mold was drained too soon. Miriam let Lena hold the casting spoon beneath each stream while the excess slip returned to the bucket. They waited 7 minutes in summer and nearly 9 in winter before turning the molds upside down. After drying, Lena trimmed the seams with a dulled steel blade and smoothed them using a damp square of chamois. Miriam inspected every fingertip beneath a magnifying lamp, not for beauty, but for honesty. "Porcelain remembers every hurried hand," she once said. Lena understood the sentence only years later. A careless touch might disappear beneath glaze, but the kiln would find it and bring it back as a twist, a blister, or a hairline crack. Miriam died in February 2021 after 3 weeks in a Steubenville hospital. Her will left Lena the kiln, casting spoon, repair books, and 27 plaster molds, wrapped in newspaper and stored in the pantry. By the time probate closed, the kiln had been removed. The shelves stood bare, except for pale circles in the dust where the molds had rested. May said storage costs had made selling them necessary. May Crowe was Lena's cousin by blood and her landlord by paperwork. She wore narrow silver glasses and carried house keys on a retractable cord clipped to her belt. After Miriam's death, she began entering expenses into a green notebook: property tax, furnace repair, fuel, legal fees. She never raised her voice. She merely tapped the figures with one square fingernail until objection felt childish. The mold money, she explained, had gone toward rent, although every receipt bore May's name and none showed what the molds had brought. Lena was allowed to sleep in the back room while she found regular work. Each week, the word aloud became heavier. On October 18, 2022, Lena returned from washing dishes at the Riverview Cafe and found her canvas bag standing beside the front steps. The casting spoon lay across its top, wrapped in one sheet of Miriam's yellowed newspaper. May waited inside the doorway with the green notebook held against her ribs. Elaine stood behind her near the hall mirror, still wearing her motel uniform. "You have until sundown. Leave the key inside." May's 8 words settled without heat. Lena looked past her toward Elaine. Her mother lowered her eyes and began folding a dish towel that was already folded. She aligned its corners, pressed the crease with her thumb, and did not speak. That small domestic motion closed the house more completely than any lock. Lena put the spoon into her coat, lifted the bag, and walked south before darkness reached the river. For the first 11 nights, she slept in the Wellsville bus shelter when the deputy did not make his evening round. On colder nights, she crossed into East Liverpool and rested upright in the laundromat on West 6th Street, feeding 1 quarter at a time into a dryer so the attendant would not ask her to leave. Her money fell from $43 in unpaid cafe wages to $31 after food, then to $19 after replacing a split boot sole with glue and tape. She rode a county bus to Lisbon after hearing that a nursing home needed kitchen help. The position had been filled that morning. She spent 4 nights beneath the covered picnic shelter at Scenic Vista Park, where wind pushed oak leaves across the concrete, like dry hands searching a table. A church volunteer gave her 2 pairs of socks and a paper cup of soup. Lena thanked her, washed the cup at a drinking fountain, and kept it for oatmeal. By the 5th week, she was back in East Liverpool with $11.38. She slept twice in an unlocked stairwell near the former pottery district, and once behind a loading dock where the bricks held a little daytime warmth. She never sold Miriam's casting spoon. When hunger sharpened, she held its worn wooden handle and remembered that her grandmother's thumb had polished one side darker than the other. On the morning her 6th week began, rain drove Lena into the Carnegie Public Library on 4th Street. She chose a table beside a radiator and opened the newspaper so the damp shoulders of her coat could dry unnoticed. The employment column offered warehouse shifts she could not reach and home care positions requiring a car. Beneath them, boxed by 2 thin black rules, was a county disposal notice. Abandoned structure. Porcelain casting room. 814 River Trace Road. $6 quitclaim fee. Buyer accepts all repair and demolition liability. A grainy photograph showed a low brick building beneath bare walnut trees. Most people would have seen the bowed roof and boarded window. Lena saw the tall drying racks behind the glass, their shelves spaced for small limbs. On the wall hung the shadow of a pouring frame. She brought the paper closer and found, beneath the blur, 3 pale plaster forms shaped like forearms. The librarian gave her a pencil, and Lena copied the clerk's telephone number onto the back of an expired bus transfer. She counted her money in the restroom: 1 $5 bill, 6 ones, 3 dimes, a nickel, and 3 pennies. The purchase would leave $5.38 for reaching a building the county intended to tear down. At noon, she folded the advertisement into quarters, placed it beside the casting spoon, and walked to the bus station to ask how near $5 could carry her to River Trace Road. Before sunset, Lena would learn that the county was not selling her a workshop so much as the final winter in which to save one. The first bus left East Liverpool before dawn, carrying Lena north through light rain toward Lisbon. She sat above the rear wheel with her canvas bag between her boots and Miriam's casting spoon inside her coat. The fare took $2.40. Every mile made the $6 property seem less like shelter and more like a question she had already answered. By 8:30, she had passed the dark windows of Hershey Bloor Pharmacy, the striped awning of Bricker's Cafeteria, the hot dog shop's red sign, L&B Donuts on Market Street, and Fresh on 5th with its chairs turned upside down behind the glass. The businesses appeared cared for in ways she had nearly forgotten buildings could be cared for. Their doors fitted their frames, their roofs sent rain where it belonged. The Columbiana County Clerk's office in Lisbon smelled of copier heat, wet wool, and the lemon oil used on the old wooden counter. Lena removed the advertisement from her bag and flattened it beneath both hands. A woman at the second desk looked up. She had white hair cut level with her jaw and a faint blue vein running beside her left temple. The brass nameplate before her read, "Ruth Holcomb, Deed Records." "I came about the casting room." Mrs. Holcomb studied Lena's damp coat, then the newspaper notice. She did not ask whether Lena was serious. She opened a gray folder marked Parcel 370841.1000 and placed 4 pages on the counter. "You understand, the county offers no title warranty." "Yes, ma'am." "You understand there is no electrical service?" "Yes, ma'am." "You understand the condemnation transfers with the deed?" "Yes, ma'am." "You understand? Demolition begins April 17th without inspection clearance." "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Holcomb rested one finger on the final page. "The $6 is not the price of the building. It is the recording fee. The county wants someone else responsible for what happens to it." Lena laid down her $5 bill and one of the ones. Miriam had taught her never to slide payment carelessly across a work table, so she aligned both notes with the counter's edge. Mrs. Holcomb turned the deed around. Lena signed Lena Elaine Crowe in the place marked Grantee. The clerk carried it to a black press, fitted a round brass stamp beneath the paper, and pulled the handle with both hands. The seal entered the deed with a dry, decisive bite. A second stamp gave the recording time. 9:17 a.m., November 29, 2022. "From here, take State Route 39 back toward East Liverpool," Mrs. Holcomb said. "Stay on it past the city and follow the river east. River Trace branches uphill beyond the survey monument. Your building is 4/10 of a mile beyond the turn, behind 2 walnut trees. The number is painted on the old mailbox, though half of the 8 is gone." She folded the county copy, then paused over Lena's signature. "Crowe." Lena waited. Mrs. Holcomb opened a lower drawer and removed a thin index card, softened at the corners. Written across its face were the words, "Miriam Crowe, Porcelain Repair," followed by a telephone number no longer in service. "She came here every March," the clerk said. "She repaired figures damaged in house fires, never charged for the work. People left them at my desk because she did not want her address printed." Lena looked at the card, but did not touch it. "She was my grandmother. I know." Mrs. Holcomb turned the card over. "She once asked whether the county still owned the River Trace casting room. That was 14 years ago. I told her the records were incomplete." "Did she say why she wanted it?" "No." "She asked who had last operated it and whether anything remained inside." Mrs. Holcomb returned the card to its drawer. When I said the property was tied up in unpaid assessments, she thanked me and never asked again. The clerk separated Lena's copy of the deed and placed it inside a heavy brown envelope. Before sealing it, she added a photocopy of the old index card. Outside, the rain had become fine enough to hang in the air. Lena spent most of what remained on a local bus back toward East Liverpool and got off where State Route 39 narrowed beside the Ohio River. From there, the deed said, she had 4.6 miles to walk. Trucks passed close enough to pull at her coat. The river moved beside her, broad and pewter-colored, carrying short pieces of wood toward Pennsylvania. By mid-afternoon, the rain had soaked through the repaired sole of her left boot. She stopped beneath the overhang of an empty produce stand and ate the last half of a bread roll saved from the previous day. She reached the survey monument near dusk, but River Trace Road was farther east than she had understood. Darkness found her beside a hay barn set back from the highway. One sliding door stood open 6 inches. Lena called twice, received no answer, and entered only far enough to escape the wind. The temperature fell to 22 degrees that night. She lay between two squared bales, with her canvas bag beneath her head and loose hay tucked around her coat. Mice worked somewhere beneath the boards. Each time she began to sleep, the barn roof contracted with a sound like a knuckle, striking a table. She held the casting spoon against her ribs until morning. At first light, she left the hay as neatly as she could and walked the remaining 2.1 miles. River Trace Road climbed away from State Route 39 through second-growth woods. Its patched pavement soon narrowed to gravel, then to two muddy wheel tracks divided by winter grass. A man in brown coveralls was splitting wood beside the only occupied house. He stopped with the maul resting on his shoulder. An old black dog came to the fence, but did not bark. "You looking for the Crowe place?" the man asked. The county called it a casting room. They called it plenty of things before they quit calling it anything. He pointed with the maul, past the walnut pear. "Keep left where the road washes out." The dog followed Lena along the fence until the wire ended, then sat and watched her go. The walnut trees appeared first, two dark trunks leaning apart like a gate. Behind them stood the building from the newspaper, smaller than Lena had imagined and more deliberate. It was 26 feet wide and perhaps 42 feet deep, built of red brick darkened almost purple by damp. A low slate roof covered the front half. Patched cedar shingles sagged over the rear workroom. The chimney rose from the eastern wall, with its cracked courses plainly visible. Above the boarded entrance hung a tin sign from one rusted chain. Crowe and Daughters Porcelain. Casting and repair, the surname had been painted in black beneath an older name, now hidden by weather. Lena raised the deed and compared the parcel number to the plate nailed beside the door. They matched. The padlock had been cut by the county. She unwound the chain and pressed her shoulder against the swollen door. It opened 6 inches, stopped on fallen plaster, then yielded with a long scrape. Cold air came out carrying wet brick, mouse nesting, and the mineral sweetness of dried clay. Lena stepped into a front room where gray daylight entered through cracks around the boards. Her boot touched something brittle. A porcelain finger, no longer than a matchstick, broke beneath the sole with a faint white snap. She stood still until her eyes adjusted. The front room held a scarred desk, 2 chairs, and a counter bowed in the middle. Dust lay thick enough to preserve the paths of mice. When Lena touched the wall, lime wash powdered her fingertips. Somewhere, above the ceiling, water gathered and released 1 drop at a time into a metal pan. Each drop carried the copper taste of old roof nails into the air. The back room was colder. Casting shelves ran along both sides, some upright, others pitched forward under collapsed plaster molds. Dried slip coated the floor in pale islands that cracked softly beneath her steps. Near the chimney stood a brick kiln with its iron door open. Lena bent and smelled cold ash, scorched firebrick, and something faintly oily from the old burner line. She found 6 doll-arm molds on the upper rack. 4 had split from freezing. 1 lacked its matching half. The 6th remained tied with cotton cord, though a fracture crossed the wrist cavity. She lifted it carefully. Its plaster drew warmth from her palms exactly as Miriam's molds had done. Behind the lowest shelf, a broad oval slip mold stood on edge beneath a film of dust. It was too large for an arm and too narrow for a head. Lena pressed one hand against it, but the piece did not shift. The plaster seemed fixed to the wall or weighted from within. She left it untouched. Before dark, she cleared a place in the front room, swept away droppings with a strip of broken lath, and laid flattened feed sacks beneath her coat. She ate nothing. The last of her money had gone into the deed and the road that brought her there. Night settled through the damaged roof. Wind moved beneath the rear shingles, making the drying racks answer with small wooden clicks. Lena lay on the floor with Miriam's casting spoon in one hand and the sealed deed beneath her shoulder. Beyond the boarded window, the river worked steadily in the dark. Comfort was repaired one tiny arm at a time. At daylight, Lena carried the galvanized pan from beneath the roof leak and began learning what the property could still provide. The well stood 30 yards behind the workroom beneath a collapsed wooden cover. Its hand pump resisted through 11 dry strokes before coughing up brown water. Lena worked it until the flow cleared, filled a glass jar, and waited. No grit settled after an hour, though she boiled every cup she drank. The outhouse leaned toward a sumac thicket, but remained usable after she replaced one hinge with baling wire. Inside the workshop, she learned the floor's language. The third plank, beyond the front counter, gave a short complaint. 2 boards beside the kiln answered together. The passage along the eastern wall remained silent if she stepped near the nails. For 3 days, she cleared plaster, carried water, and slept before darkness could deepen the cold. She did not touch the weighted slip mold. Instead, she watched it from different parts of the room, noticing that no mouse tracks crossed the dust immediately around it. On the 4th morning, she walked back toward town and entered Bell Hardware beneath a faded blue awning. The store smelled of machine oil, pine handles, and the warm iron of a ceiling furnace. Narrow aisles rose to shelves labeled by hand. Behind the counter stood Walter Bell, a broad man whose left eyebrow was divided by a white scar. He listened without interrupting while Lena explained the chimney and placed her recorded deed before him. "How much money do you have?" 38 cents. "That is not much of an account." "No, sir." Walter rubbed the scar in his eyebrow, then opened a ruled ledger. "Can you work? I can clean, sort inventory, and cast porcelain. I meant, can you finish what hurts?" Lena considered the question. Usually, he wrote, "Lena Crowe, River Trace," in the ledger and drew a line beneath it. A 6-inch wire chimney brush cost $8.75. 25 feet of polypropylene rope was $5.20, a galvanized ash bucket $6.40, leatherwork gloves $4.95, and a pint of stove cement $7.60. Walter added a dented can of beans without entering a price. "You pay when the building stops eating money." He reached beneath the counter and gave her a water-stained copy of Basic Repairs for the older Ohio house. "Read the chimney chapter before climbing." "I will." "Then read it again." Lena carried the supplies back in the bucket, shifting hands whenever the wire handle numbed her fingers. She began by removing the rusted stovepipe between the kiln room heater and the chimney thimble. She sealed the opening with 2 damp feed sacks, set the ash bucket beneath the clean-out door, and used a shaving mirror to inspect the flue. Daylight showed at the top, but only as a narrow silver shape. Creosote had thickened along the eastern side in black, glazed ridges. The roof would not safely hold her weight, so she tied the brush between 2 lengths of rope. From the attic vent, she fed one line across the chimney crown with a hooked length of lath, then returned below and pulled the brush back and forth through the flue. Each passage released soot into the bucket. The first deposits were dry and feather light. Deeper down came hard flakes that struck the metal like thrown gravel. She worked for 6 hours, stopping only to warm her hands beneath her coat. When the brush finally traveled without catching, she removed 11 pounds of soot and creosote. She sealed 2 gaps at the thimble with stove cement, waited until morning, then held a twisted strip of newspaper beneath the flue. The flame leaned inward. Lena laid 3 pieces of dry walnut in the small iron heater and lit them. Smoke entered the chimney instead of the room. The draft strengthened slowly, drawing a low hum through the vent beneath the door. Heat reached her hands first, then her knees. She opened Walter's dented can of beans with a tool from the desk and warmed it in a blackened saucepan. The beans tasted faintly of smoke and tin. She ate beside the heater with Miriam's casting spoon, one measured mouthful at a time. It was her first hot meal inside a place that belonged to her. That afternoon, she began a deliberate inventory of the back room. There was a footed casting table with the drain hole, worn smooth by decades of pouring. 6 maple drying bats rested beneath it, each marked with the outline of paired arms. An 80 mesh brass sieve hung beside 3 rusted trimming blades. A glass hydrometer survived inside a padded wooden tube. 2 boxes held kiln cones, numbered 018 and 019. A shallow drawer contained floral decals separated by wax paper, their red and blue pigments still clear. Near the kiln stood a stoneware crock, holding dried porcelain slip, hard as chalk, but clean beneath the surface. The last object was the oval mold behind the lowest shelf. Lena first tested the surrounding bricks with the handle of Miriam's spoon. The wall returned a flat, solid note. The shelf supports answered more brightly. When she tapped the mold, its upper half gave the soft knock of plaster, but the lower 6 inches produced a wooden sound. She cleared the floor and tried to lift it. A plaster mold that size should have weighed perhaps 25 pounds. This one barely moved under twice that effort. She slid a length of pipe beneath its edge and raised it far enough to place 2 wooden blocks underneath. The bottom was not plaster. A circular cedar disc had been fitted into the base and covered with a thin wash of slip. Its grain appeared only after Lena wiped it with a damp cloth. The disc carried 3 shallow holes, arranged in a triangle. She inserted the tips of the trimming blades and turned them together. The cedar resisted, released with a muted crack, and rotated half an inch. Cold air came from inside the mold. Lena worked the disc loose and lowered it to the floor. The hollow interior held parcels wrapped in waxed linen, packed so firmly that nothing could shift. She removed them in order and placed each one on a drying bat. The first parcel contained Miriam's ivory-handled seam scraper, a small steel pouring knife, 2 ribbon tools, and a pair of brass calipers engraved MC. The second held 4 sealed bags of dry porcelain ingredients: kaolin, feldspar, silica, and ball clay. Percentages were written on each label in Miriam's narrow hand. The third parcel was a repair ledger bound in cracked brown leather. Names and dates filled its pages beside descriptions of damaged dolls: separated shoulder, missing left hand, warped forearm, smoke-darkened glaze. A single word appeared in the payment column, again and again: none. Beneath the ledger lay an envelope addressed only to the hand that opens this, and below it, a rectangular tin box wrapped in oilcloth. Lena did not open the envelope. The tin box had no lock. Inside were 4 bank drafts protected between sheets of blotting paper. 2 were for $10,000 each, 1 for $8,400, and 1 for $5,000. All remained payable through an estate account administered in Columbiana County. Together, they totaled $33,400. Cloth bag beneath them contained circulated coins, wheat pennies, Jefferson nickels, Roosevelt dimes, and Washington quarters. Lena sorted the coins into rows on the casting table and counted twice. They came to $18.63. At the bottom of the box rested a Bronze Star medal in its dark presentation case. The reverse bore the name Thomas E. Crowe and the year 1944. $33,418.63 had waited inside the false slip mold, along with tools carrying Miriam's initials, raw porcelain enough for several test batches, and a medal belonging to a man Lena had never heard her family name. She returned the drafts to their paper sleeves. She put the coins back into the cloth bag, leaving 1 wheat penny on the table to mark that she had counted them. The medal remained open beside the unread letter. Darkness filled the windows before she could decide what any of it meant. Lena carried the envelope through the back door, but kept it sealed. Frost had hardened the ground between the walnut trees. Below the road, the Ohio River moved under a strip of moonlight, black water folding over black water without hurry. She sat on the well cover until the cold reached through her coat. The letter rested beneath her palm, its paper softened where another hand had once folded it. She could open it in the morning when the room held light and the words had somewhere to land. Behind her, the first fire settled into red coals. Inside the casting room, the bronze star waited beside Miriam's tools, and one wheat penny lay alone on the table. Comfort was repaired, one tiny arm at a time. Morning entered through the cracks around the front boards and laid narrow bars of light across the casting table. Lena brought the envelope beside the heater. When she turned it over, she recognized the long, downward stroke of the sea and the way the final letter leaned away from every word. Miriam had addressed the envelope, but the pages inside were older, folded around a note in another woman's hand. Lena opened them along their softened edge. My dear one, whoever you are, if Miriam has placed this letter where I asked, you have found the old arm mold and have already done patient work to reach it. In September, Dr. Howard Levinson at St. Elizabeth Hospital in Youngstown diagnosed pulmonary fibrosis. He says my lungs will not give me another winter of kiln dust and coal smoke, so I am setting down what must remain after me. Clara Whitcomb Crowe began this room in East Liverpool in 1888, casting small porcelain limbs for repair shops along the Ohio River. Her daughter, Evelyn Crowe Bell, born in 1878, carried the molds to Chester, West Virginia, during the pottery strike of 1912 and brought them home afterward. I, Margaret Bell Crowe, was born in this cottage in 1903 and learned beside Evelyn. My daughter Miriam, born in 1944, became the fourth pair of hands. She could repair a broken wrist so cleanly that only the kiln knew where it had failed. My husband, Thomas Edward Crowe, was lost in the Hurtgen Forest on November 6, 1944. His bronze star came home. He did not. The stone behind the back door is a marker only, placed where he drank his morning coffee before the war. The trade closed on October 14, 1988. No order had come for 11 months, and no apprentice had crossed the threshold in more than 30 years. That silence is not anyone's fault. Work changes, and sometimes a useful room must wait. If you cast again, strain the slip through 80 mesh brass cloth and keep its specific gravity near 1.78. Leave arm molds filled for 8 minutes in a warm room, longer only when the plaster feels damp. Dry each green piece for 24 hours before trimming the seam. Fire the porcelain to cone 6, about 2032 degrees Fahrenheit, and slow the final 200 degrees to 90 minutes so the fingers do not twist. The drafts are not a prize. They are roof timber, sound mortar, glass, fuel, and time enough to learn without rushing. Use what the work requires. Keep the rest for the next pair of hands. Inheritance is not what survives untouched. It is what someone is willing to clean, mend, test, and return to use. The repair ledger matters more than the money. Each unpaid entry records a person who had already lost enough. We could not restore a house after fire, but sometimes we could return one familiar object to a table. The blue porcelain lamp above the casting shelf was Clara's. Light it when you decide to stay. The house is not empty. It has been waiting. You are welcome here. Margaret Evelyn Crowe, October 17th, 1988. Miriam's smaller note had been folded around the letter. I could not save the room while I was alive, without losing it to those who saw only its value. I hid Margaret's letter again and waited for the county record to clear. If you are reading this, the name found its way home without my help. That is better. Lena read both pages a second time. She did not move when the fire settled, or when a truck passed on the distant highway. Then she aligned the original creases with her fingertips and folded each sheet exactly as it had been folded before. She returned them to the envelope without smoothing the worn corners. Behind the back door, thorn canes covered a narrow path descending toward the river. Lena cut them with the rusted trimming knife and followed the stones beneath. 20 paces from the workshop, she found a low granite marker leaning toward the walnut roots. Thomas E. Crowe, 1919, 1944. He worked here and went away. No grave lay beneath it. The ground had never settled, and no burial record had been carved along the edge. Someone had placed a porcelain doll's right hand at the base, its fingers closed around a small blue star. Weather had erased most of the glaze, but the hand remained whole. Lena cleared wet leaves from the marker and set the bronze star on top while she washed the stone with well water. When she finished, she dried the metal and carried it back inside. It belonged neither in the rain nor at the bottom of a tin box. The blue lamp waited on the highest casting shelf, beneath a collapsed roll of paper. Its porcelain reservoir was round and modest, painted with 2 cobalt lines. Lena cleaned the burner threads, trimmed the hardened wick, and filled it with lamp oil Walter had included in her account. The chimney glass had one small chip, but no crack. At dusk, she struck a match. The flame rose unevenly, smoked, then became steady when she lowered the wick. Blue borders appeared around the white porcelain. Their brush marks were not perfectly spaced. One line thickened where Clara's hand had paused more than a century before. From the lit room, Lena could see how she had arrived through a chain of actions too small to look important alone. Nadine Avery, the librarian, had let a wet stranger remain beside the radiator and had supplied the pencil that copied the county number. Ruth Holcomb had preserved Miriam's index card instead of throwing it away. Walter Bell had opened a credit ledger for someone carrying 38 cents. Owen Mercer, the neighbor with the black dog, had pointed her toward the correct fork without asking what she intended to take from the abandoned place. Even the woman at the Lisbon church, Doris Hale, had given Lena dry socks and soup, then turned away before gratitude became another debt. Before we move forward, think of one small kindness someone once gave you when they had no reason to help. Was it a meal, a ride, a patient answer, or simply a door left open? If you still remember it, tell us in the comments. Small kindnesses often travel farther than the person who offered them ever gets to see. Lena opened the repair ledger beneath Clara's lamp. The entries began in 1901 and continued through 4 distinct hands. Margaret's letters stood upright and formal. Miriam's leaned forward. Some pages contained no more than a name, a date, and the part restored. Others recorded smoke damage, missing fingers, warped shoulders, or glaze matched by eye. Beside every repair performed without payment, someone had drawn a tiny arm. Lena found Miriam's first mark dated June 3, 1958. The line was hesitant and darker where the pen had stopped at the wrist. Farther down the same page, Margaret had written, "Good seam. Fire slowly." Lena closed the ledger before memory could turn into explanation. She placed the drafts in the tin box, wrapped the coins, and left the single wheat penny on the work table. The heirloom tools went onto a folded cloth beside her bed. The bronze star rested in its open case, with Thomas's name facing upward. She spread her coat across the feed sacks and lay beside the cooling heater. Clara's blue lamp burned low on the counter, casting the shadows of the seam scraper and brass calipers across the wall. For the first time since the canvas bag had been placed outside May's door, Lena slept with what had been left to her close enough to touch. Snow reached River Trace Road on December 3, 2022, leaving 4.5 inches across the bowed roof. Lena woke to water striking the feed sacks she had placed beneath the weakest rafter. The heater still held coals, but a wet line had crossed the ceiling during the night and darkened the wall above Clara's lamp. She read the roofing chapter in Walter's repair manual, 3 times. Then she climbed into the attic, measured every span, and drew the rear roof on the back of an old invoice. The section was 26 feet wide and 22 feet long. Each slope measured 14 by 22 feet, giving her 616 square feet before waste. She ordered 7 squares of cedar shingles, 2 rolls of roofing felt, and 18 pounds of hot-dipped nails. Walter delivered the materials in his truck. From beneath the seat, he removed a roofing hatchet with a checkered face and a narrow blade. "My father's," he said. "He died owing it work." Lena accepted the hatchet with both hands. Walter had also brought Silas Morrow, a retired roofer whose shoulders leaned permanently forward. Silas wore a red wool cap and tested the rafters by striking them with his knuckles. When Lena offered to pay him from the drafts, he shook his head. "Pay attention. That will cover it." They removed the rear shingles and strips, saving every sound piece for patches. 2 rafters had split near the chimney. Lena sistered each one with new lumber extending 4 feet beyond the damaged section, and fastened the pairs with carriage bolts. Silas snapped a chalk line across the felt, and taught her to set each nail with 3 strokes, 1 to place it, 1 to drive it, and 1 lighter tap to seat the head, without cutting the shingle. "That nail's proud. Strike it again." On the 4th row, a nail folded beneath the hatchet. "Pull it." Bent nails invite water. Wind lifted the felt on the 6th day and tore 3 feet from the lower edge. They removed the damaged length instead of hiding it beneath shingles. On the 8th day, freezing rain sent them indoors, where Silas sharpened the hatchet while Lena sorted usable cedar by width. The work required 11 days. By December 15th, the last ridge shingle lay beneath a zinc cap, and the roofline no longer dipped at its center. Snow began again after dark. Lena stood in the back room listening for the metal pans to answer. None did. In January, the chimney became the next measure of whether the building could remain. The outside courses showed more damage than the interior inspection had revealed. 23 bricks were spalling, their faces opening in thin red layers. Mortar beneath the crown had powdered so completely that Lena could brush it away with 2 fingers. She built a low scaffold from borrowed planks and covered the roof around the chimney with canvas. Silas showed her how to remove only what had failed. They worked downward from the crown, numbering sound bricks in pencil before lifting them. For the exterior joints, Lena mixed 2 parts natural hydraulic lime with 1 part fire clay and 6 parts washed masonry sand. She added water slowly until the mortar held a thumbprint without shining. Around the flue liner, she used a finer mixture and packed it into the joints with a narrow pointing iron. The work lasted 3 weeks, almost all of it in temperatures between 22 and 29 degrees Fahrenheit. Lena warmed the mixing water on the heater and covered each completed section with damp burlap, then insulated it beneath folded blankets so the lime would cure instead of freeze. Mortar could not be worked properly in heavy gloves. Every 15 minutes, her bare fingers went numb. She climbed down, held them near the heater until they stung, and returned before the mix began to stiffen. One morning, the new crown developed a hairline crack because she had allowed the surface to dry too quickly. Lena cut the entire cap away while it was still green. She mixed a fresh batch, reduced the water, and covered the replacement before the wind reached it. On January 27th, Silas stood outside while Lena lit the test fire. She warmed the flue with newspaper, added kindling, then 2 pieces of walnut. Smoke rose through the rebuilt crown in one straight gray column. None escaped through the attic joints. At the heater door, the flame leaned inward with a steady draft. Silas watched the smoke for a full minute, touched 2 fingers to the brim of his red cap, and walked home. Late January brought the floors out from beneath their covering of dried slip and roof grit. Lena lifted 7 boards that had rotted below the front window. Walter found white pine planks, close enough in grain to the originals, and Silas showed her a jar of hand-cut rose-head nails recovered from an old porch. She trimmed the replacement boards to leave a narrow seasonal gap, drove the nails through pre-drilled holes, and set their irregular heads just below the surface. New pine looked almost white beside the surrounding floor, but the joints closed cleanly. A rental shop charged $14 per day for a random orbit sander. Lena carried it from room to room, beginning with 80 grit paper to remove the gray surface and dried slip. The 120 grit pass leveled the scratches. The final 220 grit pass left the pine smooth, without erasing the shallow marks made by earlier benches and work shoes. Dust entered everything. It settled along her eyelashes, whitened her sleeves, and collected beneath the sealed metal case. Each evening she wiped the bronze star, Clara's lamp, and Miriam's tools before cleaning her own hands. There was one morning when she did none of it. A great blue heron stood in the river marsh below the walnut trees, one leg hidden beneath its body. Lena carried her coffee to the well cover and watched it for nearly 3 hours. The bird moved only twice, placing each foot with such care that the water barely changed around it. When it finally opened its wings and crossed the river, the workday was half gone. Lena did not try to recover the hours. She swept one path through the dust, heated soup, and let the silent floor wait. The following day, she vacuumed the boards and applied the first coat of penetrating oil with a folded cotton cloth. 2 more coats followed, each wiped dry before the surface became tacky. The floor cured for 48 hours beneath open vents and a low fire. The new pine deepened from pale gold to dark honey. The older boards shifted toward mahogany, revealing rings and saw marks hidden for decades. The third plank beyond the counter still gave its short complaint, but now Lena knew the sound belonged to movement, not failure. February light showed every defect in the windows. Of the workshop's 8 windows, 3 contained no glass, 4 were cracked, and 1 held an original hand-blown pane dated 1788. Clara had salvaged that wavy glass from the earlier Whitcomb pottery cottage and reset it above the casting table. Lena marked it with blue tape and worked around it without removing the sash. She took the other frames apart one at a time. Old putty came away beneath gentle heat and a narrow chisel. After bedding each replacement pane in a thin line of DAP 33 glazing putty, she pressed the glass evenly against the rabbets, set glazing points every 8 inches, and tooled the outer putty at a clean angle so rain would leave the wood. 4 sash cords had rotted through. Lena replaced them with 1/4-inch braided cotton cord. She fed each length over the pulley, tied a figure-8 knot through the counterweight, and tested the sash before closing the pocket. The first weight struck the wall because the cord was 2 inches too long. She reopened the pocket and corrected it, rather than accepting the knock. She preserved the ripples and bubbles in every surviving pane. Through them, the walnut trunks bent slightly, and the river appeared to rise at the edges. On the final window, Lena seated the upper sash, drew the cotton cord tight, and lowered the frame until the meeting rails touched without rattling. A chickadee landed on the walnut branch outside. It turned once toward the glass, held still long enough for Lena to see its small black cap reflected in the restored pane, and flew toward the river. 3 failed patches taught Lena more about plaster than the first wall she finished correctly. Near the chimney, the old horsehair plaster had separated from hand-split oak lath. Her first patch sagged because the mixture was too wet. The second cracked after she hurried the drying. The third pulled loose when weakened lath broke beneath its weight. Walter found an old paper bag of horsehair in his storeroom, saved from his father's repair work. Lena soaked the fibers, separated them by hand, and mixed them into lime plaster. She pressed a scored scratch coat through the lath, followed with a 3/8 inch brown coat, then waited the full 72 hours. The final 1/8-inch coat went on beneath a damp trowel. When the surface cured without cracking, Lena rested her palm against it. These patches will hold another 100 years. Doris Hale began leaving paper bags on the doorstep every Tuesday. She was a narrow woman with flour across one sleeve and owned a cafe near the bus stop. The bags held heel slices of bread, soup in sealed jars, and once, 2 pieces of apple cake, wrapped separately. Lena carried money to the cafe after cashing the smallest draft. Doris pushed it back across the counter. In candles, when the shop reopens. After that, Lena stopped offering payment. She washed every jar, folded each paper bag, and returned them on Fridays. Caleb Mercer arrived one afternoon on a blue Schwinn bicycle, with a splitting maul balanced across the handlebars. He was 19, long-legged, and missing one front tooth. Without asking, he began breaking the fallen walnut limbs into stove lengths. Lena took 2 bills from her pocket. Caleb shook his head and continued splitting. My mother said, "About your grandfather." What did she say? That he fixed things before leaving. Caleb stacked the wood beneath the roof overhang, nodded once toward Thomas's marker, and rode home before the February light disappeared. Reverend Boyd passed each morning in a black coat polished green at the elbows. His silver mustache gathered frost when he breathed. Some days he tipped his hat without stopping. On colder mornings, he left a bundle of dry kindling beside the door. After the chimney began drawing clean, he stood beneath it, watched the smoke rise, and gave the only prayer Lena ever heard from him. "Keep this house warm." She answered by adding another piece of wood. Lena postponed the cellar until February 11th. The door beneath the front stairs had swollen shut, and opening it required a pry bar and 3 careful wedges. 7 granite steps descended into darkness. She carried Clara's lamp below and found a 12 by 15-foot room with a fieldstone floor, dry walls, and shelves cut directly into the mortar joints. At the center lay a dressed granite slab, unlike the surrounding stones. Its surface carried a carved craft mark, a tiny bent arm with 5 lines at the hand. Lena swept the edges but did not lift it. The slab was too deliberate to disturb without knowing what it covered. While cleaning the steps, she found an oak box wedged beneath the 3rd tread. It was narrow enough to fit inside the wall and blackened by age. The lid contained a tintype wrapped in wool and a brass key whose bow had been shaped like a small porcelain arm. The tintype showed a young woman standing outside the casting room in 1903. She wore a white apron and held a casting spoon across both palms. Her eyes, narrow jaw, and uneven left eyebrow were Lena's own face carried backward through time. An inscription had been scratched into the metal. Evelyn Crowe Bell, daughter of Clara Crowe, age 25, summer of 1903. Lena searched the box, cellar shelves, desk, and both doors, but the key fitted nothing. She placed it on the mantel beside Clara's lamp, where its bent arm bow cast a small shadow each evening. By March, the snow withdrew from the southern wall in narrow strips. The river rose, and the creek below River Trace became loud enough to hear from the workroom. In April, green catkins lengthened along the walnut branches and scattered yellow dust across the new shingles. Lena decided not to begin full casting that spring. The kiln had not been inspected, her hands had lost their timing, and the surviving molds required repair. She would not spend inherited money pretending readiness. From the cloth bag, she selected one worn silver quarter and sold it to a collector. The money bought enough kaolin and feldspar for small test tiles. She mixed ounces instead of buckets, recorded shrinkage, and practiced trimming straight seams on pieces no larger than her thumb. The house was patient, so was she. 2 winters later, on December 6, 2024, Lena opened the kiln after a full night of cooling. The first completed arm lay on a clean firing tile, 4 inches from shoulder to fingertip. She had poured the mold for 8 minutes, dried the green piece for 24 hours, trimmed its seam with Miriam's ivory-handled scraper, and fired it to cone 6. The fingers had remained straight. No blister marked the glaze. Only a faint line crossed the inner wrist where Lena had repaired a flaw before firing. She lifted the piece with both hands and placed it beside the casting spoon. It was not perfect. The thumb curved inward by less than 1/16 of an inch, enough that Miriam would have noticed. Lena noticed too. She entered the measurement in the firing book and wrote beneath it, "Sound. Keep as first proof." The casting room no longer leaned into weather. White pine floors reflected the blue porcelain lamp. 8 working windows held river light. Drying bats stood square beneath repaired shelves, and the rebuilt chimney drew without smoke. Thomas's bronze star rested in a walnut frame above the ledger. The false slip mold remained open on the lowest shelf, its cedar disc leaning beside it. So no one would mistake concealment for shame. The brass key waited longer than everything else. Its lock appeared after an ice storm split a dead branch from the older walnut tree. Caleb came to cut the hanging wood and found a green rectangle beneath the bark where the branch had torn away. It was a brass plate set flush into the trunk, nearly hidden by 80 years of growth. The plate carried the same bent arm mark as the cellar slab. Lena brought the key from the mantel. Its shaft entered only halfway until she cleared the keyway with a sewing needle and lamp oil. Then it turned. A narrow copper box slid from a cavity inside the tree. The metal had darkened, but its soldered seams remained dry. Within it lay a folded 48-star American flag and a sheet of paper wrapped in waxed cloth. The note was dated November 11th, 1918. Evelyn had written it after East Liverpool's bells announced the armistice ending the First World War. Her brother Samuel had died in the Meuse-Argonne offensive on October 8th, weeks before the bells. His flag arrived after the telegram. "I have put it in the walnut he planted," she wrote. "A workshop cannot spend every day looking backward. Let the tree keep what belongs to grief, and let the room below keep making what living hands require." Lena refolded the note along its original lines. She did not return the flag to the tree. She placed it in an archival box beneath Thomas's medal, joining 2 wars without confusing their losses. On Monday, May 26, 2025, Memorial Day, Lena carried the bronze star to Riverview Cemetery in East Liverpool. Walter, Doris, Caleb, and Reverend Boyd stood with her near the cemetery chapel. There was no speech. When Thomas Edward Crowe's name was read among local service members who had not returned, Lena placed the medal on the folded flag for 1 minute, then carried both home. The money required its own form of care. Lena had cashed only the $5,000 draft. From it came roof materials, lime, glass, kiln wiring, inspection fees, modest food, and the tools she could not borrow. Every expense entered the old ledger beneath a new heading: what the room required. Only 4 coins left the cloth bag. 1 silver quarter bought the first test materials. 2 Roosevelt dimes became permanent thickness gauges beside the casting table. A worn nickel was sealed beneath the final section of repaired hearth as a date marker. The remaining coins, 3 untouched bank drafts, and the unspent balance from the first were returned to the tin box. Lena wrapped them in new oilcloth and placed them inside the hollow mold with a note written on plain paper: "For the next one who needs time." She did not replace the cedar disc. The hiding place remained visible to anyone careful enough to kneel. The shop reopened quietly. Doris cleared a space on the cafe corkboard between a church supper notice and an advertisement for firewood. Lena pinned 1 index card there: "Crowe and Daughters Porcelain, Arm Repairon, Peace at a Time River Trace Road. The first request came from a woman in Chester whose porcelain figure had lost its right hand during a move. The second arrived by mail from Wheeling. By autumn, Lena kept a mailing list of 43 names in a narrow recipe box. She accepted only 3 repairs each month and returned anything beyond her skill with an honest note. No website announced the work. No newspaper photographed the room. Packages arrived wrapped in towels and old tissue paper, carrying objects important to households Lena would never enter. Caleb returned after the second autumn rain with something tied across the back of a pickup. He had outgrown the Schwinn, but still carried the same splitting maul behind the seat. The old tin sign had finally broken where one rusted chain passed through its corner. Caleb removed it, cleaned the surviving crow panel, and mounted it on a walnut board cut from the storm-damaged branch. Beneath it, he attached a second hand-carved strip. Daughters. The letters were slightly uneven. The ampersand leaned forward, and the final S descended below the line. "You could straighten that," Lena said. "I could." He did not. Together they hung the sign above the entrance. The old name remained in faded black paint. The new words held the warm color of the walnut tree, linking what weather had spared to what weather had taken. On winter evenings, Lena began another letter. "My dear one, whoever you are." She wrote that the north window stuck when rain came from Pennsylvania, and that the well pump needed 12 strokes after a hard freeze. She recorded the best slip density, the kiln's slow middle shelf, and the exact place where the floor complained beyond the counter. She wrote about the 4 drafts, the coins, the tools, and the mistake of beginning plaster before learning how slowly lime must dry. She did not describe May, the eviction, or the weeks without shelter. Those facts belonged to her life, but they were not instructions for the next person. Instead, she explained how to sharpen Miriam's seam scraper without thinning its curved edge. She wrote that Thomas's marker needed clearing each November and that Evelyn's flag should remain dry. She added the names of Walter, Doris, Caleb, Ruth Holcomb, Nadine Avery, Owen Mercer, and Reverend Boyd, because a repaired building never belonged to one pair of hands. Near the end, she set down the sentence that had followed the work through every room. Comfort was repaired one tiny arm at a time. Lena signed the letter but left the date blank. It was not yet ready to be hidden. She folded it once and placed it beneath the repair ledger, where additions could still be made. At dusk, she closed the kiln vent, washed the casting spoon, and lowered the shade above the work table. Clara's blue lamp remained lit beside the first completed arm. The porcelain doll arm casting room waits. It has always waited. In Lisbon, Ruth Holcomb kept one object in the back of her deed records drawer. On the morning Lena paid the $6 fee, Ruth had replaced the worn $1 bill with one of her own and saved Lena's beneath Miriam's index card. The bill remained there, flattened between the county record and the name that had finally returned.